to manage anything, and certainly not everything, because he can only work through people who are sycophants. Everyone else who is intelligent has been purged from the system a long time ago. And in that sort of environment, once people start to challenge the government in any form, it rapidly spreads to challenging the government and everything. And so since last Thursday, when the fire in Urumqi happened and these protests started, we have already seen the protests expand dramatically to not just be about COVID, but to be about democracy versus dictatorship. And we're seeing Winnie the Pooh holding up blank sheets of paper, which is kind of representation of, you don't really know what you're doing anymore. It's become personal in a week. And if that is allowed to continue, it will spin the entire system apart. And Chinese history is replete with examples of how everything collapses in a matter of weeks and months. This could be one of those. Option 2. Xi, one-man show, cult of personality, locks everything down in order to get it all back under political control, in which case any sort of economic dynamism dies very quickly. So neither of these scenarios are good for China as a country or good for China as an economic entity. Well, I mean, to set China aside for just a second, so many things are going wrong all at the same time. As soon as we got to the end of the Obama years and it was clear that the Americans were done maintaining globalization, first Trump, now Biden, we've always known we were going to get here. And on the China relationship, we've always known we were going to get here, whether it was because of ethics or genocide or jobs or trade security or intellectual property theft or fascism or racism, whatever method you want to use to evaluate. We've always known that the bilateral relationship was going to collapse, whether it was going to be because of something on our side, something on their side, something in between. We always known it was going away. And don't forget that COVID's in play here. The current strain of COVID is more communicable than the measles and 5 times as fatal. And we just had several hundred super spreader events.
And their vaccines don't work.
They don't work at all. So if they don't go into an immediate nationwide series of lockdowns, we are talking literally about hundreds of thousands to millions of deaths a month, concentrating what the United States did in 3 years into a very short period of time, because we were exposed in stages, and half of our exposure happened after the vaccines came out. That's not what's going on here. And we've always known that China was going to go away. Their demographics are the most terminal on the planet and in history. The birth rate in Shanghai and Beijing are the lowest ever recorded, and they just got revised down another 20% in the last 2 months. We now have a birth rate in China that in the last 6 years has dropped by 70%. And the Chinese are now admitting that they overcounted their population by over 100 million people, and all the missing millions are under age 40. So this was already a country in full demographic collapse that was going to cease to exist this decade. Everything that's happening now with Xi and COVID is just on top of that. After Mao's disaster and the Cultural Revolution and the broad-scale destruction that generated, Deng Xiaoping was brought in, and he basically helped put the pieces together and came to a working agreement with the United States to join the globalized system. And as he was in his final years as ruler, he selected 2 relatively middle-of-the-road bureaucrats who were technocrats from different factions to succeed him, and then Hu Jintao. And so they both ruled for 10 years. Zhang is from Shanghai, Hu is from the Beijing area, different factions, different geographies. The whole idea was to get a balance. But back when he did this, Deng knew that he couldn't look forward enough to figure out who was going to be there for the next 10 years. So he left it those 2 factions that he did choose to select who the compromise candidate would be for number 5. And that ended up being Xi. When Xi comes in, he recognizes that he's a compromise candidate, and he feels the need to break both factions as well as all the others to make sure that no one can challenge him. So he called it an anti-corruption campaign effort that dominated his first 5-year term, in which he got rid of everybody he saw as problematic. And then in the second 5 years, he went after the factions themselves to make sure that they could not function independently of him. And in this, Hu Jintao was broadly supportive. And by the time we got to the Third Party Congress last month, he was the only one left. And so the symbolism of taking somebody who actually supported you, but was the last semi-independent pole of power within the entire system, and publicly melon scooping them from the political discourse, that was powerful. And it started what has now become a race among the sycophants within the current government of who can prove themselves to be more loyal. And as a result, we are seeing policy collapses across the entire political system. And COVID is just one representation of that. We're seeing this in relations with Russia, in relations with the United States. We're seeing this in the power sector. We're seeing it in the financial sector. We're seeing it in housing. I mean, the whole system is shaking apart, and I gotta admit, it's kind of entertaining to watch.
Hey everyone, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from somewhere in Florida. On Monday, the 6th of February, in the early hours, an earthquake hit the city of Gaziantep in south-central Turkey, which is hard up on the Syrian border, and the destructive capacity, if it was 7.8 on the Richter scale, was felt as far away as Hatay, which is where the Turkish territory meets the Mediterranean, as well into Turkish Kurdistan, and of course throughout most of Syria. The devastation is considerable. This is definitely the strongest earthquake that has hit the area in about 20 years. Early death estimates are already well over 2,000. They'll probably be over 20,000 within a week. When an earthquake hit this area, they can really be awful. We are in a very seismically active area here, and a lot of the construction is not up to what you consider up to, say, Japanese style standards. So the idea that you could actually reach 100,000 deaths is not out of the ballpark. Earthquakes are often geopolitical events, not in that they wreck countries, although they do, but instead they provide opportunities for diplomatic breakthroughs. And as regards Turkey at this moment, there's really two countries that would be really looking to provide some aid in order to tilt politics in Turkey in a direction. The first one would be Russia. Turkey is one of the very few outlets that the Russians have right now for getting their trade in and out, and the Turks have been acting as middlemen. So if the Russians were able to provide some sort of diplomatic and economic emergency assistance, bridge building, relief crews, that sort of thing, then you could see some significant warming in relations. The problem, of course, is that all the Russians' capacity is already spoken for in Ukraine, and it's not clear that it would be worth the Russians' time to pull people off of the front lines in order to give supply to the Turks. The Russians have something that's called the Disasters Ministry, which is actually really good at doing stuff like this. It used to be run by Shoigu, who's the current defense minister, but it's really just a paramilitary arm of the government, and it's just completely spoken for already. The second group that would have an interest in maybe tilting things diplomatically with the Turks would be the Swedes. The Swedes have been trying to get into NATO for about a year now. The Turks have been threatening a veto of their membership because of the Swedes taking a certain position on Kurdish issues, what the Turks think is anathema to them being an alliance. But if Sweden, which does have some spare capacity and does have a good record of humanitarian effort, even with the Kurds, were to provide that with the Turks, it might just provide the sort of opening that the Swedes need to get over Turkish hesitance in terms of letting them join the alliance. So those are the two to watch for. You won't have to wait very long. This is the kind of thing that either happens or it doesn't within just a couple of days, because after that, it's too late and the people buried into the rubble are already gone. So we'll know soon. That's it for me.